"Get off me, Adana, please," Obinna begged, but she only laughed louder, pressing down even harder on his back. Obinna's breath became shallow as he collapsed onto the ground, his body aching under the crushing weight that sat on his back. He couldn't hold it anymore, as tears streamed down his face. The sound of laughter filled the air, sharp and mocking, as the guests at his cousin's wedding looked on. His wife, Adana, grinned down at him from atop his back, her weight bearing down on him like an immovable mountain. The crowd was speechless, unable to understand why a man who had once been the pride of the village was now being laughed at and humiliated in front of everyone. Obinna's face flushed with a mix of anger, shame, and helplessness. He wanted to scream, to fight back, but his strength was failing him. Every time he tried to move, she pushed him down harder. She wasn't just sitting on him, she was dominating him, making him feel like a child beneath her. It had happened before, but not in front of so many people, not in such a public setting. This was different. In spite of his pleas and cries, Adana refused to stand up from his back and further mocked him. The guests were beginning to murmur, some unsure of how to intervene, others too shocked to move. The wedding ceremony had halted, the focus now entirely on the scene unfolding in front of them. Obinna's tears continued to flow, not from physical pain, but from the humiliation he felt in his own heart. Here he was, a respected title holder in his village, a man who had been taught to stand tall, to never back down, and yet his wife was making a spectacle of him in front of everyone. It wasn't supposed to be like this. He had never imagined that his marriage to Adana, once a source of joy, would become a nightmare. Every time they went out, he had to endure her attacks. It was as though she wanted to show the world that she was the one in control, the one with the power, and Obinna just took it. The neighbors were the ones who often had to come to his rescue. They would pull her off him, their faces twisted with disbelief, as they tried to save him from further disgrace. But today was different. As Adana laughed, a cold realization struck Obinna. This wasn't just a momentary lapse in her behavior. It was a pattern. She was doing this on purpose, humiliating him time and time again, testing his limits. She was proving that she had the upper hand in their marriage, that Obinna was nothing more than a subject to her whims. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the guests began to intervene. A few of the men from the village rushed to Obinna's side, pushing Adana off him. They helped him to his feet, but the damage was already done. The wedding was ruined. The guests, who had once admired Obinna for his wealth and status, now looked at him with pity. "You can't let her do this to you, Obinna," one of the guests whispered, as he helped him straighten his clothes. But it was too late. The humiliation was now etched into Obinna's heart. As he stood there, shaking with fury and embarrassment, he noticed Adana glaring at him, her eyes full of defiance. She had no remorse, no shame. To her, this was just another game. A game she always won. The thought of going back home with her after the wedding made Obinna sick to his stomach. But he had no choice. He had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. His pride had been shattered in front of the villagers, and all he could do now was endure. Later that night, as they walked back to their house, Obinna could feel the weight of the silence between them. Adana didn't speak a word, and neither did he. She had no apology, no hint of regret. She was, as always, the queen in their marriage, and he was her servant, bound by the chains of his own shame. When they reached their home, Obinna slumped into a chair, staring at the floor. He couldn't believe what had happened, couldn't believe that this was his life now. He had once been a man of honor, respected by his peers, but now, he was nothing more than a broken soul, controlled by a woman who treated him like a child. Adana, on the other hand, was already making herself comfortable. She sat down on the couch, flipping through a magazine, as if nothing had happened. The sight of her, so calm and indifferent, filled Obinna with a deep sense of frustration. "How long are you going to keep doing this?" he finally asked, his voice barely a whisper. Adana didn't look up. "Keep doing what?" "This, humiliating me, making me feel like I'm nothing." Obinna's voice was louder now, his anger seeping through. "Why do you do this to me? Why do you sit on me, laugh at me, and make everyone think I'm weak?" Adana looked up then, her lips curling into a smirk. "Because you are weak, Obinna, and I enjoy it." The words hit Obinna like a slap in the face. He had never felt more powerless, more helpless in his life. His own wife, his own partner, saw him as nothing more than a toy to play with, a source of amusement. Obinna stood up abruptly, his fists clenched. "I've had enough." But Adana only laughed, a cruel, mocking laugh. "What are you going to do, Obinna? You can't even stand up to me in front of others. What makes you think you'll do anything different now?" The challenge in her words burnt in Obinna's chest. For the first time in years, something inside him snapped. He couldn't live like this anymore. He wouldn't let her break him. He needed to fight back. But how? How could he stand up to her when every time he tried, she crushed him? The answer came to him slowly, like a whisper in the dark. He had to do something drastic, something that would change everything. But would it be enough? Would he finally have the power to stop the humiliation? Would he finally be able to become the man he once was? The thought of losing his dignity forever haunted him. But he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't let this go on any longer. As Obinna sat in silence, formulating a plan, a thought crossed his mind, a thought that he had never dared entertain before. He had heard rumors of a local herbalist who could help people with problems just like his. But would the herbalist's solution be enough to change his fate? Obinna didn't know. But he was desperate. Desperate to regain his respect, desperate to stop the humiliation, and desperate to take control of his life once again. Would he risk everything to put an end to his suffering? Or would he continue to be the man who everyone pitied, the man who was defeated by his own wife? The answers would come soon, very soon. The days that followed the wedding were filled with silence, thick and heavy, like a cloud that hung over Obinna's head. His mind raced, replaying the humiliating scene over and over again. He couldn't escape it. The laughter, the mocking eyes of the guests, the way Adana had sat on him like a queen upon her throne, none of it seemed real. And yet, it was. He couldn't undo what had been done, but he could change what was to come. Obinna knew he had to act quickly. He couldn't live in fear of his wife any longer. The humiliation had reached its peak, and he wasn't going to let it destroy him. But what could he do? Every time he tried to fight back, Adana's overwhelming strength crushed him, both physically and emotionally. No one had ever been able to help him. His pride as a title holder had been shattered, and his manhood had been trampled upon, all under the weight of a woman who refused to show him any respect. The answer came to him like a flash of lightning, bright and sudden. There had been whispers around the village, rumors of a powerful herbalist who could solve any problem, no matter how strange or impossible it seemed. People said the herbalist had magic, old powers handed down through generations, and that those who sought his help never left disappointed. Obinna's heart skipped a beat. Could this herbalist truly help him? Could he rid Adana of her strength? The strength that seemed to come from her enormous size. Without another thought, Obinna set out the very next morning to find the herbalist. The sun was still low in the sky, and the village was quiet, but Obinna's mind was loud, filled with thoughts of the future. His steps were determined, each one bringing him closer to the answer he needed. The herbalist lived on the outskirts of the village, near the thick forest where the ancient trees whispered secrets of the past. Obinna had heard many stories about the herbalist's home, about the strange plants that grew there and the potions that bubbled in mysterious cauldrons. It sounded like something out of a fairy tale, but Obinna wasn't concerned with the fantastical. He just wanted his life back. As he approached the herbalist's home, a small hut covered in vines and surrounded by lush greenery, Obinna felt a sense of unease wash over him. It was as though the air was heavier here, thick with an energy he couldn't understand. But he pushed the feeling aside. He needed answers. The herbalist, an old man with a long white beard and eyes that seemed to see straight through Obinna, greeted him with a knowing smile. "You've come for help," the herbalist said, his voice raspy, like the crackling of dried leaves. Obinna nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "Yes, I don't know what else to do. My wife, she's hurting me. She's humiliated me in front of everyone. She controls everything. I need to stop this. I need to be a man again." The herbalist listened quietly, his eyes never leaving Obinna's face. When Obinna finished, the old man simply nodded, as though he had expected this request. "You are not the first to seek my help," he said softly. "But the answer you seek is not simple. The woman you speak of, Adana, was once a beautiful, slim woman, full of life. But she broke a sacred law, a law that angered the gods of the river. For that, she was cursed." Obinna's heart sank. "Cursed? What do you mean?" The herbalist gestured for Obinna to sit. "It is said that Adana went to the river to fetch water at the forbidden hour, when the goddess of the river comes to bathe. She angered the goddess, who placed a curse on her. She gave Adana a weight that she could not carry, and with that weight, the goddess stole her happiness and her future. She could not bear children, and she would forever dominate her husband. This is the price of defying the river goddess." Obinna listened, stunned. He had heard of the village's traditions and the sacred customs of their ancestors, but he had never believed in the power of curses. Yet, as he looked at the herbalist's grave expression, he couldn't help but feel that this man knew something deep and ancient, something that could change his life. "So, is there a way to lift the curse?" Obinna asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The herbalist nodded slowly. "There is a way, but it comes with a price. You must weaken her strength, the strength she gained from the curse. Only then will she be freed from the power that controls her. But remember, Obinna, this will not be easy. You must be patient, and you must be careful. The curse is powerful, and Adana will not change easily." Obinna's mind raced. He wasn't sure if he believed in the curse, but he didn't care. All he knew was that he couldn't continue living in fear. He had to act, and if this herbalist could help him, he would do whatever it took. The herbalist handed him a small, worn pouch filled with a powdery substance. "Give this to her. Add it to her food or drink. It will begin to weaken her, but it will take time. The more she loses her strength, the more she will become the woman she was before." Obinna took the pouch, his hands trembling. "Thank you," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. The herbalist looked at him one last time, his eyes filled with a knowing sadness. "You must be careful, Obinna. Power, once taken, can be hard to handle, and once she loses her strength, she will be desperate. She may fight back. Be prepared for what comes next." Obinna nodded, his heart heavy with the weight of the task ahead. He wasn't sure what he was getting into, but he knew that he couldn't go back. He had to do this, for himself, for his dignity. As Obinna left the herbalist's home, he felt a sense of resolve settle within him. The path ahead would be difficult, but it was the only path that could lead him to freedom. He would end the humiliation. He would take back control. As Obinna walked back home, his mind focused on the herbalist's words. A new thought began to take root in his mind. What if this didn't work? What if the curse was too strong, and Adana's power could not be broken? The fear of failure gnawed at him, but he couldn't afford to doubt. He had to believe it would work. When he finally reached his house, he found Adana sitting at the table with a cold glare in her eyes. She had been waiting for him. Obinna stood at the doorway, holding the drink he had prepared. Would this be the moment that would change everything? Or would he be making the biggest mistake of his life? Obinna stood frozen in the doorway, his heart hammering in his chest. Adana was sitting at the kitchen table, as usual. Her face was hard and unforgiving. The room was dimly lit, casting shadows across her stern expression. She didn't look up when Obinna entered, as though she already knew he was there. The atmosphere in the house felt tense. The silence between them was thick, loaded with unspoken anger and frustration. Obinna stepped forward, the pouch from the herbalist still clutched tightly in his hand. His palms were sweaty, his thoughts racing. The drink in his hand felt heavier with every step he took toward her. He had no idea what this moment would bring, but he knew he had come too far to back down now. He had to do this, no matter the consequences. "Adana?" Obinna said, his voice surprisingly steady despite the storm of emotions inside him. "I'm sorry I've been late. I was making arrangements for something important." Adana didn't respond. She didn't even look up. Her eyes were fixed on the ground, and her lips were set in a firm line. It was clear she wasn't interested in any explanations, least of all the ones Obinna offered. He had become accustomed to her indifference, her coldness. But tonight, things were different. Tonight, he was going to take control, no matter how difficult it was. Obinna took a deep breath, steeling himself, and approached her. He placed the drink in front of her on the table, trying his best to mask the nervousness creeping up his spine. "Here," he said quietly. "I brought you something to drink." Adana finally looked up at him, her eyes narrowing as if she was trying to figure out what he was up to. She didn't speak, but her gaze was heavy with suspicion. Obinna had learnt over the years to read her moods. This was the look she gave him whenever she was about to strike, whenever she was ready to lash out. The corner of her mouth twitched slightly, almost as if she were about to say something cutting. But instead, she just picked up the drink and took a long sip, her eyes still fixed on him. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Obinna stood there, waiting, his heart heavy. The room seemed to hold its breath. He watched Adana carefully, waiting for any sign that the herbalist's potion was taking effect. His fingers itched, his mind racing with doubt. Had he made a mistake? Was this really the right thing to do? Then, almost imperceptibly, Adana's hand trembled slightly as she set the glass back on the table. Her eyes flickered, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she looked uncertain. The tension in the room shifted, ever so slightly, but it was enough. It was the first sign of weakness from her he had seen in years. Adana stared at the glass, as if she couldn't quite understand what was happening to her. The silence stretched between them, heavy and oppressive. Obinna took a step back, unsure of how to proceed. The seconds dragged on, each one feeling like an eternity. Adana suddenly stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. She walked across the room, her steps unsteady, as though her legs were betraying her. Obinna held his breath, unsure of what to expect next. Would she lash out? Would she scream at him like she usually did? But instead, she collapsed onto the couch, her face pale. Her eyes were wide, filled with confusion and fear. She placed a hand on her stomach, as if she were trying to steady herself, but her breathing was shallow, and her chest rose and fell rapidly. "Adana?" Obinna's voice trembled with concern. This wasn't what he had expected. The potion was supposed to make her lose weight gradually, not make her feel this way. He had no idea what was going on. I don't feel right," Adana murmured. "What did you give me?" Obinna's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't expected her to react like this. Was this the beginning of the change he had been hoping for? Or had he made a grave mistake? I'm sorry," Obinna said quickly, his voice low. "I didn't want to hurt you. He paused, his words catching in his throat. The confession he had been too afraid to make for so long was now slipping out, unbidden. "I couldn't take it anymore, Adana. The way you've treated me. The way you humiliate me in front of everyone. I couldn't live like that anymore." Adana's eyes narrowed, and she glared at him. But there was something different about the way she looked at him now. The fury that usually burnt in her gaze seemed to have dimmed, replaced by something darker, something that made Obinna's blood run cold. "You think this is what I deserve?" She spat, her voice hoarse. "You think you can just poison me to make me weaker, to make me submit to you?" Obinna took a cautious step back, realizing he had underestimated just how furious she could become. "I didn't mean to hurt you, Adana," he said quietly, his voice shaking. "I just wanted to stop the humiliation, to stop the way you've been treating me. I'm tired of living in fear. I'm tired of being afraid of my own wife." Adana's laugh was harsh, almost bitter. "You think you're the only one who's suffered, Obinna? You think I haven't lived a life of humiliation too? Do you think I don't see the way people look at me? Do you think I don't know the weight of the curse that's been placed on me?" Her words hit Obinna like a slap. He had never thought about it that way before. For all the years he had spent in pain, in silence, he had never considered that Adana might be suffering, too. But was it enough to excuse the way she treated him? Could he allow her to continue humiliating him simply because she was cursed? The room was thick with tension. The anger between them simmered just below the surface, threatening to boil over at any moment. Obinna didn't know what to do next. Should he apologize? Should he try to comfort her? Or should he press on, pushing her to change, to finally become the woman he had once married? Adana's breathing slowed, and she stood up shakily. You think you can change me, Obinna? You think you can fix everything with some potion and a few sweet words? Her voice trembled, but there was something else in her eye, a deep, primal anger. I've had enough of being the person you try to control. You've awakened something inside me, something you may not be able to handle. Obinna's heart raced. Was this the beginning of her breaking? Or had he just unleashed something far worse than he had imagined? The days that followed, Adanna's strange reaction to the potion were tense, filled with an unease that hung in the air like a storm cloud, waiting to burst. Obinna watched her closely, as though waiting for something to change, to shift in the balance of their marriage. But instead of the gradual transformation he had hoped for, Adanna's behavior grew more erratic. She was no longer the woman who had once dominated him with her sheer size and power. Now, she seemed to be struggling with something deeper, something inside her that she couldn't control. Adanna was quieter, more withdrawn. She would sit for hours, staring at the walls or out the window, her mind seemingly far away. She would hardly speak to Obinna, and when she did, her words were sharp and laced with bitterness. It was as though the curse, the weight she had carried for so long, was finally starting to slip away, leaving her raw and vulnerable. But her anger wasn't gone. It was simmering beneath the surface, just waiting to explode. Obinna, on the other hand, had started to feel a strange sense of power. It was subtle at first, like the flicker of a flame that could one day become a blaze. He had always been afraid of Adanna, afraid of the physical and emotional torment she had put him through. But now, he could see the cracks in her armor. He was beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could regain control of his life. But his newfound strength was tempered with doubt. What if Adanna's curse was deeper than he thought? What if the potion didn't work the way the herbalist had said it would? What if, instead of breaking her power, it had only made her more dangerous? One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned to shades of gold and purple, Obinna found himself alone with Adanna in the house. The silence between them was deafening, the air thick with unspoken words. Adanna sat at the table, her eyes fixed on a piece of cloth she was idly twisting between her fingers. Obinna had been trying to find the right moment to speak to her, but every time he looked at her, the anger and fear from their past confrontations bubbled to the surface. "Adanna," Obinna said, his voice steady but unsure. "We need to talk." She didn't look up, but her hand froze, stilling the fabric she had been twisting. Obinna took a step closer, his eyes searching her face. "I know you're angry with me. But what happened, what you did at the wedding, it can't happen again. I can't keep living like this." Adanna's lips curled into a bitter smile, but there was no humor in it. "So now you want to talk?" she said coldly, her voice low but edged with venom. "Now you want to act like a man?" Obinna's chest tightened. "I've always been a man, Adanna, but you've been treating me like I'm nothing. You humiliate me, push me to my limits. And for what? To make yourself feel powerful." The words hung between them, heavy and full of accusation. Obinna didn't know where the courage had come from, but it felt good to finally say what he had been holding inside for so long. His voice had become firmer and stronger, and as he spoke, he realized he didn't just want to be heard. He needed to be understood. He needed her to see him, to recognize him as the man he was. But Adanna's laughter shattered the moment, harsh and mocking. "You think I'm the problem?" she spat. "You think I'm the one who's wrong? You've been nothing but a shadow of a man, Obinna. I made you weak. You let me make you weak. And now, you want to come here and pretend like you're in charge? Like you're the one who's going to make the rules?" Her words were like daggers, and Obinna flinched at the venom in her voice. The anger that had been simmering inside him for years bubbled to the surface. He wanted to shout at her, to tell her everything he had been holding back, but instead, he took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "I don't want to fight anymore," he said, his voice quieter now, but still firm. "I want respect. I want you to see me as your equal, as your partner. I don't want to be your punching bag, Adanna. I don't want to be the man who's afraid of his own wife." For a long moment, Adanna said nothing. Her face was unreadable, her eyes focused on the table in front of her. Then, slowly, she stood up, her movements deliberate and controlled. Obinna watched her, uncertain of what was going to happen next. "You think you can change me, Obinna?" Adanna's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried a weight that sent a chill through Obinna's bones. "You think you can fix what's been broken for so long?" Obinna nodded, his heart pounding. "I don't know if I can fix everything, but I can try, and I will. I can't live like this anymore. I won't." Adanna's eyes darkened, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Then do it. Change me, Obinna. But remember, when you change me, you change everything. And you might not be able to control what happens next." Her words hung in the air like a threat, and for a moment, Obinna wasn't sure what to make of them. Was she testing him? Was she daring him to push further? Or was she trying to warn him of the danger he had just unleashed? Before Obinna could respond, Adana turned and walked out of the room, leaving him standing in the dim light, alone with his thoughts. The sense of unease that had been growing in his chest intensified, and he couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to get much worse. Later that night, as Obinna lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling, he heard something that sent a cold shiver down his spine. The sound of footsteps. But they weren't his. They were heavy, deliberate steps, and they were coming closer. He turned toward the door, his heart racing. Was it Adana? Or had something else entered their house? Something that would change everything? Obinna's heart raced as the sound of footsteps drew closer. The quiet creak of the floorboards echoed in the otherwise still house. His mind whirled with fear and confusion. Adana had left the room earlier, but the steps that followed were heavier, more deliberate. They were not the light, quick steps of his wife. These steps were laden with purpose, and they seemed to draw nearer, closing the gap between him and whatever waited for him outside. The darkness of the room seemed to grow deeper, suffocating him. Every second felt like an eternity. He strained his ears, trying to make sense of the situation. The steps stopped just outside the door. Obinna held his breath, unsure of what to do. Should he confront whatever was out there, or should he hide, waiting for the danger to pass? Just as his mind seemed to reach its breaking point, the door swung open with a loud crash. His body tensed, ready to spring into action. But when his eyes adjusted to the dark, he saw her, Adana, standing in the doorway, her face shrouded in shadows. But she wasn't the Adana he had known before. This Adana, this version of her, was different. Her eyes burnt with an intensity that was foreign to him, something dark and primal that made his blood run cold. Her body seemed more solid, more grounded, as if she had shed the weight that had once defined her. Her form was leaner, but her presence or aura was far more powerful than anything Obinna had encountered before. "Do you still think you can control me, Obinna?" Adana's voice was low, her tone dripping with a strange combination of anger and something else, something darker, like a challenge. Obinna swallowed hard, the sense of dread tightening around his chest. "Adana, what are you talking about? What's going on?" She stepped forward, her silhouette slowly taking shape in the dim light. "You think you can change me, fix me, make me what you want me to be? Do you think I'm just some weak woman who will bow to you when you give me a potion? You've been a fool, Obinna." Her words cut into him, sharper than any physical blow she had ever delivered. Obinna felt a chill run through him, his fingers tingling with a mix of fear and anger. He had gone through so much to get here, to get the strength to stand up to Herond. Now she was telling him he was a fool. "No, Adana," Obinna said, his voice shaky but determined. "I did this because I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't stand being humiliated, being treated like a child. I just wanted respect, for once." Adana's lips curled into a cruel smile. "Respect? You think that's what this is about? You think that's what you deserve?" Obinna took a step back, confusion flooding his thoughts. "What do you mean? You've treated me like nothing. I've been nothing to you." Adana's eyes gleamed in the dark, her expression twisting into something almost sadistic. "You were always nothing, Obinna, always weaker than me. But you want to know why? It wasn't because of the curse. It wasn't because of the goddess. It was because you let me. You let me control you, dominate you. You're not a man, Obinna. You're a puppet, and I was the one holding the strings. Obinna staggered, his mind struggling to process her words. Everything he thought he understood, everything he thought he knew about their marriage, about their relationship, it was all a lie. He looked at her, trying to find the woman he had once married, the woman he had loved. But all he saw was someone unrecognizable, someone who reveled in the power she had over him. The realization hit him like a slap to the face. The curse wasn't just a magical faucet, it was their relationship, their dynamic. And it wasn't going to change unless both of them made the choice to break free. "You're wrong," Obinna said, his voice growing stronger. "I'm not a puppet, and I won't be controlled anymore." Adanna's laugh was cold, almost cruel. "You think you've figured it out? You think you can just stand up to me and I'll bend to your will?" She stepped forward, her eyes burning with fury. "You haven't even begun to understand what you've done." Obinna clenched his fists, his muscles tightening with frustration. He couldn't let her continue to mock him, to belittle him. He had spent years trapped in a cage of his own making, and now that he had the strength to fight back, he couldn't allow it to slip away. "I'm not afraid of you anymore, Adanna," Obinna said, the words coming out like a vow. "I've been afraid for too long, and I won't let you break me again." With that, he moved forward, stepping into the darkness, his eyes fixed on her. He didn't know what would happen next. He didn't know if this would lead to more violence, more pain, or if it would lead to something even worse. But he wasn't going to back down. Adanna's expression faltered for a moment, a flicker of uncertainty passing over her face. But it was gone just as quickly as it appeared, replaced by an expression of complete rage. "You still don't understand, do you?" she hissed. "You've made a terrible mistake, Obinna. You've unleashed something you can't control." She lunged at him, her arms outstretched, but Obinna was faster. In one swift motion, he grabbed her wrists, holding them firmly in place. The raw power of the confrontation shocked both of them. Adanna struggled, her strength still formidable, but Obinna's resolve was even stronger. For the first time in years, he felt in control. "I'm in control now," he said, his voice steady but firm. "Not you. Not anymore." But just as Obinna thought he had gained the upper hand, the room seemed to shift. Adanna's eyes glowed with a strange, unnatural light, and her body surged with energy. Obinna's grip faltered for just a moment, and in that instant, Adanna broke free. But Obinna wasn't afraid. He had come too far to be intimidated now. This fight wasn't just physical, it was about power, control, and the balance of their entire relationship. And for the first time in his life, Obinna was ready to reclaim everything he had lost, as he was supposed to be in control. As Adanna recoiled, her expression twisted in rage, and something almost otherworldly flashed in her eyes. Obinna knew that the final test was coming. Would he be able to keep control? Or would he lose everything he had worked for in the battle for dominance and respect? To achieve his goal of being in control like other men in the village, Obinna called Adanna to the sitting room the following day and ordered her to kneel down. He believed he needed to try again since Adanna had lost her weight. He shouldn't be afraid of her anymore. Adanna, in her usual way, rushed to pounce on him, but Obinna held her hands. Adanna struggled to break free, but she couldn't. She was no longer who she used to be. With one swift motion, Obinna carried her and landed her on the couch. But he didn't hit her, he just proved he was now in charge. But when Adanna failed to comply, he pounced on her, and it took the intervention of their neighbors to stop him when Adanna was crying and calling for her. It was then clear to her it was no longer business as usual. Obinna announced himself as the man of the house, and his neighbors and the villagers can't stop talking about how he suddenly became so powerful that he can now handle his wife's excesses. But what was more astonishing to most villagers was how Adanna lost so much weight within a few weeks. When the neighbors left, Adanna stood up in shame and went directly into her room. She couldn't handle the humiliation, and she was not ready to submit so easily. And there, he concluded to fight back and not be like other women whom their husbands control at will. She was not ready to submit to Obinna and was prepared to fight back, to regain her strength with whatever it takes. What do you think Adanna would do? Will she regain her strength back, or will she use other means to fight back? I would like to read your views. If you like this story, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel for more interesting stories.